Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, we're a couple of minutes late. If I can just get people to mute their microphones at the start, because we're just getting some feedback. Perfect. Thank you for joining us on our last membership meeting for the year. Christmas is coming around very quickly, and I'm hoping everyone's going to take some time and get a bit of a refresh if possible. We've juggled things around just a little bit to accommodate a few different people, but we might slowly kick off if everyone's ready. So we'll go through the technical and training first up today, moving on to the MPAQ update and then the HR update. In technical, so Certificate 3 in Plumbing has undergone a review over the last year or two. The new course has been released. Some RTOs are delivering it, some are still in teach out on the older training package. Now, the new training package is only 58 units compared to the 64 in the old training package. But some of those units are combined. So they took some of the old units and combined them into one or two units together, creating new units. So the same information is being conveyed to the apprentice, but there are a couple of additional new units included, which does equate to some additional hours in college for your apprentice. In talking with TAFE Queensland, this will work out to about 2 additional weeks, roughly, of training they'll undertake during their apprenticeship, institutional training. As I said, not all RTOs are delivering that yet. I don't believe TAFE Queensland is delivering the new course yet, if your apprentices are with TAFE, but Teach Out has been extended to 1 January 2024, so they've potentially got another 12 months to deliver the old training package and transition into the new, which can be a real headache for the RTO and a real headache for students, because if they're halfway through an old training package and they've got to transition to the new one, if things aren't equivalent, which they won't all be, there's got to be either some gap training or some RPL or some skills assessment to get them into the new one. It's quite a nightmare for the RTO to actually do that, especially if they've got hundreds of apprentices. But they'll be doing that over the next 12 months. NCC 2022, the new National Construction Code, which includes the Building Code of Australia, Volumes 1 and 2, and Volume 3, which is the Plumbing Code of Australia, has been released. It was released in October this year, but it is not adopted until 1 May 2023. Now, what this means is, apart from those 3 documents not being active until 1 May, for us, the Plumbing Code of Australia calls up an array of Australian standards and different documents that we refer to. And one of those is AS 3500 and various other standards, which new versions have been released. So there's AS 3500 2021 out there. You can buy it. We just can't use it until the 1st of May, when it is adopted formally through the National Construction Code, if that makes sense. There's also secondary reference documents. One of those that we all use, or that most of us use, would be AS 2845.3, which is your backflow testing standard. Again, 2845.3 2020 has been released, but here in Queensland we can't use it until AS 3500 is called up, which won't be until 1 May 2023. So you're currently still testing valves to the 2010 version, and you're still working on the 2018 version of 3500. So I've kind of ticked off on that new standards. There is an array of new standards called up under the PCA, as I said, but you should be operating on the current ones until 1 May, when the new ones will be adopted. Lead in plumbing. Lead in plumbing's been a conversation that's been happening for quite a few years now. It's finally been instigated and put into place through the ABCB, meaning that manufacturers of brass materials or brass plumbing products that include lead in the brass for added malleability. It's easier to machine the brass when there's a lead content in there. These products are now required to what they're calling in Australia lead-free. It's not actually lead-free. It's a 0.05% of lead. But the common term used overseas is lead-free, so they've decided to stick with lead-free instead of low lead. And the generic or the majority of those products have until 2025 to transition into that. And much like your products have a watermark symbol attached to the actual or branded into the product or on the packaging, your lead-free products will also have a logo and a stamp on those to identify that they are lead-free. Products from 2025, when this comes into place, that are not lead-free will not be able to be installed or sold for plumbing purposes. They can still be sold for other purposes such as irrigation or something like that that's not dealing with drinking water, but materials in contact with drinking water will be required to be low lead. New AS5601 has been released, and that is adopted straight away. There is a 6-month implementation where you can still use the current version that you would have, but it's 2021 version. Has the 6-month transition. So at the end of the 6 months, so in May next year, you will be using the new version, the 2021. Safety system. So this is an exciting one. We've been doing some investigation into a safety system for members to use. Excuse me. As you would know, business owners or persons conducting a business or undertaking are required to have an up-to-date safety system in place for their business that manages all the safety requirements of the business and their staff. This includes things like work method statements, your SWIMs, your chemical registers, your MSDSs, and all those sort of things. All have to be encapsulated into your safety system or safety plan for the business, and all your staff and employees have to be aware of that and implement it when they do jobs. As apart from, well, moving down that track, a lot of companies do have them. They're either using them actively or they're sitting on a shelf somewhere and possibly out of date, but a lot of members don't have them in place where they should. So to address that and be a benefit to our members, MPAQ has moved down the path of implementing or sourcing and implementing a safety system that will be accessible by members at no cost. This will be in place early next year, and those wanting to access and utilize the system will be able to once it's live. This will be a system that you can use in the field. You can do it on your people on the tools can do it in the field. It can also be used back at the office, so that if you implement a policy or you want to send a SWIMS out to all your people, you can do that from base and send it out to everyone. Once they've read it, it's actually ticked off that they've read it, or it doesn't have to be a SWIMS. It could be a safety brief or a tech sheet. It can be anything that can be utilised through the system that you can implement to your staff and keep a record of its use. Should something go wrong, you'll have all those steps in place to cover yourselves. And I'm also pleased to announce that the Australian Standards access that we currently have for members at no cost, that they can access the suite of standards online. We have signed a new contract for that, and that will be available continuing into next year. So there's no change there except for the addition of the new 3500.0. As there is a new one released, that will be included in the suite as well. Now, just moving on to training quickly, the new training calendar for 2023 has been released and open for enrolments now. Just briefly, the first course is coming up in 2023. We have an estimate and cost work 17th and 18th of January here in Brisbane. Commission and maintain backflow prevention devices, 25th of January. We're going out to Warwick for that one. Then another backflow here in Brisbane, 6th to the 8th of February. A TMV on the 9th of February here in Brisbane. A online plumbing legislation course on the 14th of February, and a carry-out work-based risk control processes the 23rd to the 24th of February, also here in Acacia Ridge. That's it for me for the moment. I'll hand over to Penny, who's going to go through some other topics. Penny?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ernie. Yes, today I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview just in relation to the construction plastic recycling scheme. I'm going to touch on the developer review that's currently happening and the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan as well. So we'll just go to the next slide, please. So the construction plastic recycling scheme was officially launched on Friday, the 12th of November last year. And the scheme aims to divert valuable PVC pipe offcuts and fittings from landfill to be recycled into new PVC pipes, contributing to a circular economy. The scheme was only operational for 6 months and it went very well. Although we had floods and COVID impacted, we still got a good result in the end. We decided to approach the state government here in Queensland, to ask them if they would be willing to extend the scheme for an additional 6 months with the purchase of additional bins for greater expansion of locations. We got approval and the new pilot program commenced in October this year, and we held some breakfasts in National Recycling Week, which was held on the 7th to the 11th of November. Our partners in the group include Piper, Vinidex, iPlex, TradeLink, and Reece. We also have bags available that we've been giving out to some of the plumbing contractors that want to have it on the back of their utes or within their trucks, so that when they're on site, they can actually, or when they're on a job, they can actually put their offcuts of PVC straight into the bags. If we go to the next slide, it will just show you the new or the current locations for all the bins. So we have PICAC at Beenleigh. So that's obviously a registered training organisation which is teaching plumbing, and also the Toowoomba TAFE as well. We've just recently been out to the TAFE, Toowoomba and PICAC Beenleigh to give a presentation to apprentices so that they can understand the benefits of recycling. We have a bin on the Queen's Wharf development in the city, the Caboolture Hospital redevelopment, and then we have a number of Reece and TradeLink stores. So we have Reece Mansfield, Reece and Nogra, Reece Browns Plains, and Reece Labrador. And in terms of TradeLink, we have TradeLink Burleigh Heads, North Lakes, Kunda Park, and Woolloongabba. We also still have a bin at Prominence Outlook at Pollara, which is a housing estate, and a new bin put at the Bond Institute of Health and Sport. So if you're out and about, and if you're on a job site or you're working and you've got offcuts of PVC, just keep them and drop them off at one of these locations, and they'll be able to take it for you. The stores have the bins usually out the front. So yeah, just obviously speak to the store manager for that. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So this is the developer review discussion paper. So the developer review panel released a discussion paper for public consultation, and submissions closed on Friday, the 16th of December. In November last year, the Minister appointed an independent panel to conduct a review into the role of developers in the construction industry. And this followed industry feedback about the important role of developers and the need to examine the impact of their financial and operational capacity, ethical behaviour, and work practices. The panel consists of Alison Quinn, who's the chair, Gina Patrick, and Mr. John Payne as well. Since the panel was appointed, they've conducted over 50 hours of consultation with key stakeholders, including the panel's industry reference group, which has informed the development of the discussion paper. MPAQ will be preparing a submission, and some of the key issues that we will be raising include unfair terms and conditions in contracts, bank guarantees, and the Personal Property Security Register. If anybody has any feedback or would like to share, please send me an email and we'll look to include that within our submission. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so the next slide is just talking a little bit around the Premier releasing Queensland Energy Plan, which was released on Wednesday, the 28th of September. The Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan comes at a critical time for Queensland. As we know, the east coast of Australia is facing energy shortages. A cornerstone of the landmark of the Queensland Energy and Job Plans includes progressing the development of the largest pumped hydro energy storage project in the world to power Queensland into the renewable energy era. A new publicly owned entity, Queensland Hydro, has been created to progress the project, which is west of Mackay, and I'm sure you've all heard about that on the radio. The Queensland Energy Plan outlines how the Queensland Government is going to achieve our renewable energy targets and ensure a sustainable and affordable energy future for Queensland. And this is what they've set: 50% renewable energy target by 2030, 70% by 2032, and 80% by 2035. If we go to the next slide, as part of the energy plan, there are a couple of areas that are relevant to hydrogen that I just wanted to touch on. So there is an action item within the energy plan which talks about growing the future of the renewable hydrogen industry. And the Queensland Government, as I'm sure you've all heard recently, has a long-standing commitment to the development of an economically sustainable and competitive renewable hydrogen industry to create jobs and to diversify Queensland's economy. So some of the key things that have been noted in the energy plan is up to $15 million to supercharge and coordinate and further plan for renewable hydrogen hubs, to review the hydrogen development guidance, the local government review of the Queensland hydrogen industry strategy, a release of a revised strategy to support the growth, invest up to $5 million to roll out a renewable hydrogen awareness program. And this is something as an association that we are very supportive of and really want to get involved in so that we can ensure consumers and licensees are aware of hydrogen and not always the negative side of hydrogen. And the last one is to investigate the potential for renewable hydrogen gas target in consultation with industry. So that just gives you a little bit of an update on some of the key areas that we've been working on here. And obviously Ernie's already gone through the technical and training. I might just hand back to you, Ernie, but before I do, I'd just like to thank all the members that have joined, and I hope you have a safe and happy Christmas. Thanks, Ern.
Thanks, Penny. Okay, we might hand over to Kim, who's going to cover the HR update on secure jobs, better pay, family and domestic violence leave, and Christmas party tips. Kim, are you there?
Sorry, Ern, it's just going to be me today.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Emma.
So yeah, as Ernie mentioned, we'll talk through the security jobs and better pay bill, which I believe was passed last night through Parliament. So we just wanted to run through and give a bit of an overview of some of the key areas that are going to be changed in the employment legislation and sort of in that area. There's some things that employers are going to have to be changing in terms of what their current processes might be. So certainly reach out to either Kim or myself to talk that through with how to do it. What does it look like? What do you need to do? And how to implement. So some of the main areas relating to this bill is surrounding the gender pay equity. So from some surveys and feedback and a deep dive, I guess, that the government has done into the gender pay gap, it's determined that in a way to try and rectify that issue for equal pay for equal work, is around making sure that people who are doing the same job are getting paid the same amount, regardless of whether they're men, women, and doing comparable work. So that's kind of where the drive for some of the items in this bill came from. One area that the government has thought to be able to rectify this issue is to remove any pay secrecy clauses. So this references basically it will be an ability for employees to be able to openly discuss their salary and terms and conditions of employment with fellow colleagues, with their managers, with people external to the organisation. And if there's a discrepancy, they're able to bring that to management and basically say, Joe Blogg's next to me, does the same job, they get paid X dollars more. Let's talk. Even if in your employment contract, you've got confidentiality or ensuring that your salary and terms and conditions remain confidential, the government is saying in this bill that that will be void, basically, even if your employment contract still states it, because their belief is that the pay secrecy is a way of being able to have different pay for equal work. So it could be a good time to review your employment contracts to see what wording you could potentially put in, and also to start to work on a bit of a plan on when and if employees come to you with a bit of a dispute about maybe potentially not getting the same pay for equal work. I guess if it's employers, it could be a good time to really look at what is equal work. So if there's two people really doing the exact same job, why is there pay discrepancies? Why is there different levels? Is it because of performance? Is it because of longevity with the organisation? So they might have gotten a bit of an extra bonus over time. Or if you've got two people that have been in this organisation the same amount of time doing the exact same roles, maybe it's time to basically have a look at, do they need to be on the same level of pay, or do you need to be starting to have some discussions? If it's more around that there's performances, two employees have different performance levels, and also around that longevity of employment, then that is a basis for employers to be able to say, yes, you might be doing some parts of equal work, but you've also got employees that might have been with the business for 5 years versus 6 months. So it's not going to be a right for an employee to be able to say, well, I've got this discrepancy, I should therefore be paying the same rate. It's opening those discussions and being able to have responses. So start to think about that if you've got employees. Other things to consider are the length of fixed term contracts. So sometimes businesses use fixed term contracts for project work or for a particular period of time because it might be either a new role for the organisation or it might be a role that has been split out from another employee. And this bill has allowed that a fixed term contract can be no longer than 2 years in length and it can only be renewed once. This is to avoid employees having rolling fixed term contracts over and over and not having certainty of whether they're going to continue. Rightly, wrongly, it's kind of have a think about how, if you are using fixed term contracts, how that's going to apply to your business, particularly if you do use fixed term contracts for particular projects. It might mean that then you're utilising those employees in different parts of your business. The next big part is the prohibition on sexual harassment at work. So sexual harassment has been part of employment in terms of employers' obligation to investigate if a claim is raised, have a grievance policy and be able to, I guess, determine whether somebody has been sexually harassed or not sexually harassed. In the past, Fair Work Commission has had the ability for an employee to lodge what was called a stop sexual harassment orders, where it was basically sexual harassment had to cease. The implementation in the new bill is that the onus is more heavily focused on employers and PCBUs, persons conducting a business or undertaking, to align it to workplace health and safety legislation. and requiring employers to basically have a really positive duty to prevent sexual harassment, not just respond to claims of sexual harassment. So in the prevention of sexual harassment, it's looking at having a harassment policy, a grievance policy, so that it is, if a claim is made, that they have a process of being able to review that grievance, having regular training about sexual harassment and ensuring that it doesn't occur, potentially look at training your managers with an external training provider on sexual harassment and how to notice it, what to do when responding to a claim, how to openly be talking about your employees, and also in pulling up employees if you do see anybody making jokes, lewd comments, anything surrounding that sexual nature. It's also having a look at, is your workplace a hostile work environment? And that might even come down to the type of pictures that are being displayed in the lunchroom, back of computer screens. What messages are employees sharing amongst the team about something that could be of a sexual nature or perceived sexual nature? And it's not, the definition is kind of expanded further as well to not just include like sexual nature, but it's also on the basis of sex. So that's somebody's gender, somebody who identifies as a particular gender is all being brought into this, this amendment for an employer to have a positive duty to prevent sexual harassment. So certainly having a look at what your policies currently are. If you don't have a sexual harassment policy or sexual harassment, discrimination, bullying, certainly let us know, because this is going to be an area where particularly Fair Work is going to potentially come down pretty hard. It's also expanded that it's not just going to be the powers within Fair Work Commission to have stop orders. They're going to be able to penalise. And if there's serious contraventions, those penalties get up very, very quickly and costly for the business. Further to this, there is an extension of anti-discrimination provisions. So currently in the different anti-discrimination legislations within state legislations, it also included a lot of different state legislations included breastfeeding, gender identity and intersex status, but it wasn't included in the Fair Work Act. These definitions are now also going to be brought into the Fair Work Act, which basically means if an employee has a claim of an intersex status as a discrimination reason, the employer can have disputes against them under the Fair Work Act and can potentially have a breach of the Fair Work Act penalty put against them. So there's some fairly big areas where businesses need to really be considering and looking at. So again, that could be also updating your anti-discrimination policies as well within your business. Ash, if you could just go to the next slide. Other areas are relating to enterprise agreements, and also I haven't made mention of it here, but multi-sector enterprise agreements. But also zombie agreements. So a zombie agreement is an enterprise agreement that might have been made prior to 1 January 2010 when the Fair Work Act came into play. So any zombie agreements can still be being in use at the moment, but this legislation and this bill will say that it must be sunsetted. So it must be terminated after initial 12 months grace period of when the bill got passed, so that businesses have got that time to be able to renegotiate what their agreements are, because prior to 1 January, businesses could potentially have clauses in there around no overtime, that all work is performed at ordinary rates because it was under the work choices legislation. In addition, the other big area is around flexible work provisions. So extending that definition to be any employee that might be affected by family and domestic violence leave. So currently flexible work arrangements were surrounding employees that might have caring responsibilities, might have disabilities, or caring for somebody with a disability, somebody over particular ages, whereas this is also permitting that if an employee comes to an employer and says, I've got some family and domestic violence, that I need to rectify or change my situation. And to do that, I need to have a flexible work provision. So that's just now going to be permitted under the Fair Work Act as well. Ash, if you wouldn't mind changing to the next one. So then we also come to the next big leave type that has been approved. So employees, so all employees, full-time, part-time and casual employees will now have an entitlement, well, sorry, now into 2023, an entitlement to 10 days of paid leave within any 12-month period of employment. And this type of leave is from the date of employment. So as soon as they start, they have access to 10 days of paid leave. And it's paid at the rate that they were rostered to perform. So if they were a casual employee that was rostered to perform their work tomorrow and potentially have an afternoon shift, then they would also get the casual loading and also the afternoon shift loading as well in terms of payment for that type of leave. It doesn't accrue year to year, but it is an entitlement for 10 days. That 10 days could be either 10 one-day periods, 2 5-day periods, or 10 days in one bulk amount. So it's also having a look at this leave is for an employee to do something in relation to the family and domestic violence leave. So that could be going to court, it could be contacting the police, it could be seeking further counselling, it could be looking at alternative housing options, getting that support through different domestic violence channels in terms of social workers, how to get their kids out of a particular like environment, whether they stay and they're trying to move their kids to somewhere else. So the leave type is for the employee to do something, to act and remove or change the situation that they're in. So as you note there that it commences from 1st of February 2023 for non-small businesses. So that's basically anyone 15 plus employees, and that's total employees. And 1st of August 2023 for any small businesses, so 14 or less employees. So now's kind of the time to start looking at how you're going to have your family and domestic violence leave policy, how you're going to implement it, potentially looking at how you're going to have those, your managers have those discussions with employees, and what to do if an employee does raise that they're in a family domestic violence situation. So getting yourself familiar with different support networks and also making your managers aware of what sort of leave type an employee can do. In an employee accessing this, an employer can ask for evidence to support that they're going to do something. At the moment, evidence is sort of around like a court order or a police report or something of that nature. However, the definition of who can put in for this leave has also expanded to somebody within an employee's household. So if I was living in a share house and my friend that I was living with was in a domestic violence situation, I could be supporting her in going to talk to the police and access this leave. It would be hard for my employer to then potentially ask for a police report of my household friend, but it might be in the form of an affidavit or something like that. So the employer can ask for reasonable evidence for an employee to demonstrate that they're doing something about their situation. Some other things that employers might need to consider is actually what name or leave type to put on their pay slips. Because a lot of the family and domestic violence leave family and domestic violence can also come into financial violence in terms of withholding money to their partner. So if the perpetrator is the one that sees the pay slips and they see family and domestic violence leave on the pay slip, that could be an avenue for the violence to, I guess, kick off. So it's time now for employers and businesses to be preparing of what to include on your pay slips. So it's a bit of a change, and certainly it might be some businesses are going to have a lot of employees accessing this leave, and other business might not have any employees accessing this leave. So if an employee doesn't use all the 10 days, it doesn't roll over to the next year. It just means that on their anniversary of employment, they get another 10 days access to this leave because their circumstances might change from year to year. So certainly reach out to Kim or I if you've got any questions on this new type of leave. And Ash, if you could just move to the next one, thank you. So given that we're now into December and coming into Christmas, we thought it might be a good time to just give a bit of an overview on some tips if you're having Christmas parties with your team. So prior to the Christmas party, maybe just outline what your expectations and standards are prior to the party. It's a good time to kind of think about this sexual harassment new change, because that can come into play at Christmas parties as well. Maybe just reminding employees that they're representing the company, and certainly if you're out on a Christmas party and they're in uniform, that could have an impact on your the view that people have of your business. Potentially also avoiding unlimited drinks. So have caps on your drinks package. We're not saying that you've got to be a party pooper and say no drinks. It's just avoid unlimited open bar, open slather, so that there's an element of control on it. Providing food is also always a good option, because if you're not providing food and just getting employees to purchase food themselves, you'll get those that will, and you'll get those that will just prefer to potentially have drinks, and then that could be where they get a bit messy. Hold your event off-site if possible, so that it's not in the workplace. And any unsavoury behaviour, sometimes on the night it's not the best to deal with it, particularly if there's an element of alcohol being involved. Talk about it the next week or the next day or whenever they're next in the workplace, but it's important to talk about it and address it. Just making sure that on the night every employee is safe, so whether they're getting home safe, whether they've got their own accommodation, potentially doing, I know you don't really do taxi vouchers anymore, but paying for Ubers or anything like that, just so that then you know that you've upheld your requirement to keep employees safe, because a work event is still part of their employment. So that's pretty much it from me. Feel free to ask any questions. Otherwise, please contact Kim or myself in anything that pops up at a Christmas party or any other of the things that we've discussed today. Thanks, Ernie.
Thanks very much, Emma. We might open it up to questions for the group. Has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask of anyone?
I'm assuming that the 10 days domestic violence leave is in addition to the 10 days sick leave, is it, Emma?
Yeah, that's right. So the 4 weeks annual leave and 10 days personal carers leave still remains exactly as is. So if an employee's utilised all of their personal leave, they can still get access to this family domestic violence leave. Good question.
So do they have to use that first, Emma?
No. There's no requirement to exhaust all your leave. If they're in a family and domestic violence situation and they need to act on and do something, then they would use their family and domestic violence leave first before any other leave. And the annual leave and personal carers leave would still accumulate on when they're on that leave, because it's still taken as a paid day of work.
Wow.
Okay. Any other questions? Doesn't have to be about things we've talked about today. They can be totally random questions if you like. No, silence from the crowd. All right, well, then we might finish up just a little bit early today, but we'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a happy and safe period off. Hopefully you get some time to spend with family and friends relaxing over the period. The office, MPAQ office, will be closed between the 23rd of December and the 9th of January, but there will be emergency numbers up on the website if you do need to contact us. Otherwise, you can call me, and I'm sure I can assist you, or Penny will be able to take calls as well. And if we don't know the answer, we'll certainly be able to help you find the answer for whatever the problem is. So on that, unless anyone has any last minute questions, we might close the meeting, and we'll see you all.
Sorry. Do you mind if I just ask Emma a question? It just came up this week with vehicle policies. Are you allowed to have a zero alcohol policy when driving company vehicles?
Yeah, so that could depend on the insurance policy. So it's always good for employers to check their insurance policy, because some might say it's got to be a zero alcohol on driving your vehicle. Even though the road rules are you can have one standard drink. So it's always good to check that. And then if an employer still determines, no, it's got to be zero alcohol, you can put it in your policy. I guess it just then would lead to, if they're caught with still being able to drive, that then you would have to deal with being in breach of the policy, and ensuring that employees are trained on it, shown what the policy is, and that the employee has signed off on that policy to acknowledge that they accept that they will drive without any alcohol in their system or drugs at all.
Thank you, Emma.
No worries.
Have the big EBA sites got a zero drug and alcohol policy when they're on site?
It could come down to the different site, but majority of them, I would suspect, yes. And majority of the big sites would also have potentially random drug testing as well, drug and alcohol testing when coming on site.
Yep.
It's always good as well for businesses to have a drug and alcohol policy themselves, so that it really sets the standard that if an employee is suspected to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, what's the business going to do about it? Are they going to send them home? Are they going to go to a medical practitioner and get a test? Are they going to do their own test? What does that mean for the employee? So it's good to have the two in sort of support of each other. Like a vehicle policy, obviously you can't drive if you've had 10 drinks. But then what happens if somebody is under the influence of drug or alcohol at work? And we've got example policies for that if the business needs.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. All right, everyone. Any last questions before we finish up?
Sorry,
Okay.
Ernie,
Yep.
I just have one question. You spoke about the apprentices having to do approximately 2 extra weeks of their apprenticeship.
Mhm.
I know that several members have asked in relation to, because they actually have to pay the apprentice while they're at TAFE. So is there going to be any assistance from the government to assist in the payment for this?
Not that I'm aware of. No, nothing's come across, or nothing's come out that the government's going to subsidise that or anything. No.
Thanks for that.
Sorry, Anne, actually just on that, does that then mean because they're doing 2 weeks of additional institutionalised training, that essentially the 2 weeks of on-the-job learning is reduced so that the time period still remains the same of 4 years?
Your time period still remains the same. Yeah, correct.
Okay.
All right. Okay, everyone. As I said before, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Stay safe, stay well, and we will see you in 2023.
Thanks, Ernie. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.